Okay, I don't see anyone in the waiting room, so let's go ahead and get underway. Good morning, everyone. My name is Anna Swardensky, and I'm with CADRE, the Collaborating Agencies Disaster Relief Effort. We are the local VOAD for Santa Clara County. VOAD, another acronym, stands for Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster. And we're really pleased today to bring you this session on the rent relief programs that are available for COVID-19 pandemic folks in our community. And so let's get underway with a few housekeeping details for starters. We are running live captioning, and so if you would like to take advantage of that resource, we have it operating in two ways. One is through Zoom itself. You'll see in your control panel a live transcript button. You're able to toggle that on and see a full transcript window running in the side, and or subtitles that you can turn on or off to your comfort. The other live captioning service you should see in the upper left corner is the ability to run captioning through a service called Otter AI. And you can open a separate browser window if that works better for you. I will serve as the access coordinator for today's meeting. So if you have any accessibility needs, please feel free to direct message me in the chat box. With that, our housekeeping note is that everyone is muted. And if you have questions or comments, if you could first start off by using the chat box, and then when I turn it over to our presenters today, if they'd like to handle questions differently, they'll make that known to you. Okay, let's see, what else? Oh, if you could start by introducing yourselves with your first name and the name of the organization that you represent in the chat box, that would be super helpful so we can all get to know one another. If you have a moment to turn on your screen so we can put a name and a face together, and then you can go back to being off camera if that's your preference, that would be wonderful. So thank you, everyone. Wonderful. Nice to see some faces this morning. Thank you so much. So first name and the organization that you represent. You did have an opportunity in the registration for today's session to enter in any questions you might have about the rent relief programs, but I didn't get any in registration. But if you have one now, again, feel free to use the chat box and put that in there. And that'll help our presenters know what information you're wanting to hear this morning along with their presentation. So with that, I think I would like to go ahead and move us right into today's program. I'd like to introduce our two presenters for this morning from Project Sentinel. Emily Hislop is a Special Programs Manager, and Joann Pham is a Rent Stabilization Analyst. And they're going to be talking us through the state's Emergency Rental Assistance Program, in particular the Tenant application. And they'll give you a little bit more detail on Project Sentinel as a nonprofit, but in essence, they're essentially a housing service agency that serves communities all across Northern California. And we are very pleased and grateful to have Emily and Joann join us this morning. So with that, let me go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And Joann, if you want to go ahead and take over, there you are.
Thank you so much, by the way, Anna.
Of course.
Let me know if you all can see my screen or...
Yeah, we're good.
Okay.
Thanks, Joann. So I saw one question already in the chat. I'm Emily Hislop. We're going to give you an overview of some major revisions to the state application, and also just sort of talk about the process in general. And I will also shed some light on a lot of the questions that are in the community about the moratorium and new legislation. So we are officially a local part of the local partner network for the California COVID-19 rent relief program. You can switch slides. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Project Sentinel, we're a nonprofit. We provide various types of housing counseling. Neutral landlord tenant counseling and dispute resolution is one of our core services, and that's the division Joann and I are with. We also provide fair housing services and mortgage counseling, and support some cities with their rent control programs. So as we always say in every presentation, we are not in the position of giving legal advice or legal representation, but we offer tips, best practices, and an overview of local and state laws. Next slide. Just very basically, I'm sure most of you know the eligibility for any kind of rent relief in the state or county is at a minimum tenants who are low income or 80% of the AMI. The programs are set to cover both rent or rental arrearages, prospective rent, utility payments, and even other housing related expenses. So this can even include internet. How that's being administered and with which set of funds we'll get into a little bit, but very, overview is there's a lot of relief available. And then we also want to just show you the income brackets so you get an idea of what that means for households in our county. The extremely low income is 30% of AMI, and that this group of households is best served by the local program because they're trying to provide wraparound services as part of their homelessness prevention system. And we will be distributing these slides. We need to clean them up a bit. There were some major revisions that happened over the weekend and other little hiccups that we're trying to address. We do have the AMI amounts for this county and other counties on our website, housing.org/COVID-19. Next slide. So the basic process for applying in the state program is either landlords or tenants may initiate the application. Tenants must participate in order for funds to be dispersed. This is not going to change with any future legislation or changes to the program. If a landlord or tenant initiates independently of each other, they're matched based on the property address. There are case managers as part of the state program. That's not us, that's not local, who reach out to landlords to make sure that, and determine their participation. That's done through a third-party consultant that the state hired. Now, these next couple things are very likely going to change in the coming weeks. So the initial set of funding, which we'll get into, landlords were to be paid at least 80% of the rental back rent for a certain period of time if they agreed to waive the remaining 20. Now, everybody heard Gavin Newsom's announcement a few weeks ago about that landlords would be getting 100%. This is not going to be reflected in the application or any material until there's legislation to put that in place. And that is currently being worked on as part of the budget for the whole state. It's kind of an opaque process, so we can't tell you exact numbers, but he has publicly made this promise, and quite frankly, he has a recall coming up. So if it's not honored, that's going to be some trouble for him. But they have committed to try, finding ways for landlords that have already applied and agreed to waive the 20% that they will be made whole. Now that's great for landlords. That really doesn't change anything for tenants. They were okay no matter what. This next part, tenants are paid at least 25% of the rental arrearages and forward rent directly to them if the landlords don't participate. And this is so tenants can ensure the eviction protections of SB 91. We are given indications that this may change because of the problems with getting landlord participation and just some of the issues. And there's been indications that this will be addressed in the future set of funding and the legislation. So there may be ways if a landlord really doesn't participate for a tenant to get the full amount back so they can pay it to the landlord. It's just, we can't present that here because it's not on the books yet. When tenants apply for utility help, either past utility or future, the state has it hooked up with the utility providers and they pay the utility providers directly. This is just a flow chart of how the state application works, and the front end of it and what happens on the back end, which is on the right side. And we're told that the case managers make multiple attempts to reach out to both parties to try to get people hooked up. Now, we'll get into that, but we have a lot of questions about this. It's true, things have been slow going and there's a myriad of reasons why. So from what we understand, most of the applications in Santa Clara are still in process, and we just don't have any numbers on what money has been dispersed. But and we're also trying to get information about, how many applications have had case managers assigned and what people might expect. Next slide. Very basically, no matter what, even with any changes, both the landlord and tenant need an email address to create an account on the state's portal to apply. All of the local partners are trained on how to help people set up an account. There is an ability to add users, so you can have someone help you out. We are encouraging landlords and tenants to work together in this process to get things moved along most efficiently and easily for both of them. Either providing their case IDs numbers for the application, so they can call up the state number and find out what they need to do next. If a tenant or a landlord initiates an application, so if a landlord initiates the application, a tenant gets this email. They may have since changed this. We put this in our earlier presentations because we were afraid that people might think it was spam or phishing, but this is a picture of what the email looked like, at least in April, from Neighborly Software, but I think they may have changed the email address domain. So it says California COVID Rent Relief, because we have set up test accounts and seen some difference. So we've told either landlords and tenants to let the other know what to look out for. You can even print out an email or forward them the email that you got. So they know that it's not a scam and they know how to start. Next slide. So I was talking about the two, that there will be changes to the program. So the current program and the parameters I just saw a question pop up and I just want to address it really quick. This is only about residential tenancies. This is not about small business. There's legislation, I believe, trying to get through, but this is just residential tenancies. And it covers any residential tenancies. Okay, so I think it's good to point out that the program we're dealing with right now and the parameters and the rules are all because of the first set of funding, which came from the federal government at the end of last year. That was a different administration. So the guidelines that were given for that relief were written by that administration. And then the way the program is implemented was through this state legislation, SB 91, that happened in January. And they had to kind of deal within the framework of the federal guidance. So under this first set of funding, that's the $26 billion that went to California. That's funding number one we're trying to get through. But there's been more funding that was passed in maybe March, the American Rescue Plan, with much clearer guidelines, and that's what we're waiting for the state to talk about how they're going to implement that next set of funding. So under ERAP 1, the first set of funding, it's a maximum of 15 months assistance. So this includes the back rent that was from April to March, April of last year, March to this year, and then forward rent, 25% of or more of forward rent, but with a max of 15 months assistance. Let's see, eviction moratorium during months requested. So as everybody knows, the eviction moratorium, not sure. Hey, Joann, do you want to clarify what the second point is?
Sure. So for the second point, in reviewing the submission page of the landlord's application, they agree to not evict the tenants during the months of rental assistance requested. So, you know, if they're not really requesting future rent and they don't receive the future rent timely, then, you know, it may not cover, you know, the time beyond the time that they receive the assistance. In ERAP 2, that's clarified that there's a longer period for that of 30 to 90 days, but that's subject to what our state is planning on doing with that. But our points in this slide are purely based on the US Treasury guidance for the ERAP 2 section.
Okay, great. So I think the better thing to focus on is ERAP 2, because this is what we're waiting for. This has better protections and is anticipating more of the issues and the questions that we are getting. So there's a lot of discussion at the state level about extending the eviction moratorium. We're keeping told that that's likely going to happen. We don't know in what form and what requirements. Just as a side note, because I know people have this question, San Jose is going to City Council on June 22nd to extend the eviction moratorium 60 days with some certain parameters if the state doesn't act. The County Board of Supervisors at their meeting on Tuesday discussed having their county council come to them with proposals for extending the eviction moratorium, whatever they can do legally, be at this on the same date, June 22nd. So both, we're hearing that it's very anticipated that the state will extend the eviction moratorium, but our local city and county governments are also poised to take action. Everybody knows the money is not flowing. There is still a high need, and that people may not be able to make July rent, and there needs to be some protections in place. So I would love to tell you that it's going to be extended. All I can say is all these like 3 different levels of government are working on it. It's just, it has to happen through the budget bill, which is just unfortunately kind of a opaque process. It's not a normal legislation where it gets published and you can give comments and everything. So I would guess in the next, we have to hear something right after June 15th. So in the next couple of weeks, we should know something, A, about the eviction moratorium, and B, what the plans are for the next round of funding, which is, I think, it's doubling what was given. And they also are looking at being able to give funds to tenants immediately to ensure that they aren't in danger of eviction. So also under ERAP 2, it's a maximum of 18 months of assistance, which includes the assistance received during ERAP 1. Okay, I know I'm going to have questions later, so let's just keep moving along and I could try to adjust those questions. Next slide. So part of the reason that our slides are very last minute, in the last couple weeks, the state was working directly with partners, including us, about how they could streamline and make the application process more accessible for people. Another thing I just wanted to mention, like big picture wise, nothing of this magnitude has ever happened in our country's history. Trying to distribute such a large amount of funds to such a large amount of people in such a quick amount of time and not have fraud. That has never been undertaken. It was very ambitious timeline. This program was, built and put up within a couple months. The people who build these programs are not the same people who are using these programs. So all the kinks of what the user experience is like, what the tenant actually experiences when they're trying, that is not part of their process, and they were just trying to get the door open. Whether there might be obstacles in the way, they want to just get everybody on the other side of the door. And the ways that you have to get the information to the other side, it's not that smooth. We're just, the main thing to counsel people when they're going through this application process is just do your best. Once it gets through the system, it gets in the hands of an actual person to sort things out. So I just want to emphasize that's, you know, it's a work in progress, and they're trying to perfect it, and they have done a good job of listening to our input. So on Friday, they implemented a lot of these changes really quickly. So there's still some kinks that we will point out. But the major changes went live Friday evening and were automatically implemented to pending applications. Tenants with applications pending received an email about it. The sections have been a little bit reorganized, but the application is much easier to complete, so it will take less time. Tenants don't have to upload as much paperwork. They can just click some boxes to attest to things. They also give tips and explanations throughout, and that's what we can still refine with the state, because it's not a legal or a software change. It's just adding some language so people understand what is being asked. So they also are saying that the tenants have, or applicants have 7 days to complete their applications. Otherwise, they will be moved to a non-responsive status. I really would take these warnings with a grain of salt. This is just kind of the incentive to move people along, but it's not, their application's not going to go away. Many of us have created our own accounts to check without submitting an application to see how things are going. And we've never submitted our application, and it's never, you know, gone away or been inaccessible. If for some reason it does go to that status, I think somebody asked about numbers. People are supposed to email support@ca-rentrelief.com or call this number. This is 430-2122, area code 833. This is where people also can call to ask about the status of their application or questions about it. And they would provide their name and their applicant case ID number, which is always on the left side of the screen. So next slide.
I just want to add one thing about this non-responsive status. So I did include that point because it was emailed to everyone that this was one of the new features. But I do think that the 7-day deadline actually applies only to landlords, but I intend to figure out more about what that is. So I think it's triggered by a tenant's application submission, and then usually these deadlines usually apply to landlords to determine if they're participating. So I just wanted to clear that up.
Thank you, Joanne. And I think that the main takeaway from here is that if a tenant is worried because they got this email and it said that, to just say, look, that may apply to something else, just it's okay. And just remind them, this is a huge process and there's still some kinks. And the goal for everyone is to get people help. We need to disperse these funds within a certain time framework. And that's what everyone wants. There's not a tendency to withhold. They want to be able to get the funds to people if they just want to avoid fraud. So, you know, they're not going to cut people off just because of 7 days. Okay, next slide. So Joanne has provided sort of an overview of some of the major changes. Since we're speaking to some nonprofits, we just want to remind that there is an option to identify a representative. So if you're helping a tenant start an application and they don't really use email, or you know, they need kind of your support in doing it, you can add your name and email so you can check the status and help them make revisions. So that's under a users section. A big problem in the last application is it had a box for late fees, which was concerning because the law, SB 91, prohibited late fees on the back rent. So now there's clarification that that's not allowed. And also, this was also another hurdle for tenants, that it you know, required you to put a landlord's email, and many tenants may not have had a landlord's email. So now you can just give the phone number for the landlord or the landlord representative, just whatever phone number the tenant has to contact their management. Another really you know, important addition is that cash income certification. So people who have sort of non-traditional jobs or get paid in cash, or you know, do housework, other cleaning work that's not subject to a 1099 or anything. There's no document upload required. That the tenant can certify that they are paid in cash, you know, by clicking, and when they submit the application, it's like they're attesting under penalty of perjury to that. Now they've cleared up that utility statements can be uploaded even if they're not in the applicant's name, because some people are applying for it and it may be in the name of someone who doesn't live there anymore. Proof of legal identity is not required if income documentation was provided. So this just cuts down the paperwork load. And also, if the utilities assistance that requested is in the tenant's name, they don't need to prove their legal identity. And the tenant doesn't need to prove the amounts of rent owed if the tenant is certain that the landlord is participating in the program. So they'll be asked a question, is your landlord participating? And if you're sure they are, you can click that, and the tenant doesn't need to detail all the amounts owed and for what months. Next slide. This is the tenant checklist for the types of information they'll use. I don't think there's been any changes to this, but the application has gotten much better at when you get to the first screen, it tells you what you're going to need to do it, to complete it. So it might actually be more useful to look at the application than this checklist. Next slide. So this is a reminder of things that landlords were supposed to serve on tenants, just notices of their rights and a declaration of financial distress. You know, the point's becoming a little moot now because some of the requirements that were made for applying for rent relief are not there, like having, I don't think they have to upload any 15-day notice. But if a landlord is, you know, does want to reserve their rights, this is the things they need to do. We want to tell you guys, just in case your tenant comes to you with a fistful of paperwork and says, I don't know, I'm panicked, they're going to evict me. It might be these things, which the tenant's required to do by law. They should still submit the declaration of COVID-19 financial distress if they are served with a blank one, if they are still under financial distress due to COVID. I will say that it's very likely that any extension of the eviction moratorium, whether at the local or state level, will still require tenants to attest to being financially distressed in some form. It might be, you know, they can do it once to cover a certain amount of a certain period of time, but some form of this requirement is still going to be there. And if a tenant's worried about it, like they've never been served with that form and they want to make sure, you know, they're not required to, but they can get the form in, and it's in 6 languages on the housing.ca.gov website under tenant forms, which we have the link to here. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to pause for a second because we were going to go through how tenants initiate, and I feel like I should address some of the questions if that's okay. Okay, I think some of these okay, there is one question I should answer. So in cases where tenants who apply to the state program are evicted, will they still receive the assistance to pay their debt? They should not be evicted for non-payment of rent. That should not be happening. One of the things they're talking about with ERAP too that I think they want to make is that, and there's a question on the application, is if the tenant self-evicted, like they moved out because they were afraid of all the debt, they can still apply for the back rent to be paid. And the landlord has to participate though. But this is kind of a relief for people who just moved out of their, you know, place and moved in with someone else to save money, that they have this debt hanging over their head. That, and landlords were concerned about this too. They can apply still and to receive the rent. It's that's a question on the application. But if a tenant's applied to the state program, there may be a defense to them if they are evicted for non-payment. They really shouldn't be. We would encourage them to be connected to Law Foundation or Bay Area Legal Aid, because if they have received eviction papers and they have applied for rent relief, that there could be some legal recourse there to sort out, you know, whether there's any right to, but getting legal help is really important. I think that was the first question. And Joann will go over what the best way to track with our application is. Okay, so we've addressed all that. Joann, can you go to the slide with the, I just made a slide with secrenthelp.org.
Sure.
You can go back to this one, I'll pass it to you, but I want people to see, I kind of want to suggest that people start here. The county has on their web made this webpage, secrenthelp.org, and it has, I put it in the middle, but it tells you the income brackets and will direct a tenant to the local program if they're below 30% AMI, and then direct them to the state program if they're below 80% but above 30%. And I think that the county place, this website's a good place to start because you're going to get the best information for Santa Clara County. It's okay to go start at the state site, but if anything changes at the county level or if they want to get some information to you, I think it's a good idea to start here, just because it also gives other resources, connects, you know, people to other things that they may not have known about. And there's also local phone numbers where people can call to get assistance. So if they want to make an appointment with Catholic Charities, you know, they already know they're not going to be able to do this application on their own. They can call the Catholic Charities number down here at the bottom. The same thing with the local program. They can call to be connected to a local partner and get in the queue for an appointment for services. And you can go back to the 211, Joann, and I'll let you take over in a sec. Just real quick, some differences between, okay. Oh, sorry, thank you, Tal, if I'm pronouncing your name right. If a client who applied, who is ELI less than 30%, applied to the state program before the county program opened, should they not apply for the county program unless they get rejected / denied from the state program, or if they're in an emergency situation such as facing eviction? Okay, there was, the state is going, for people who submitted an application who were ELI before the county program was launched, the state will still process those applications, and tenants may have gotten they may have gotten an email about rejection, but there should have been a correction email that went out that said, yes, they will be processed. But if they are in an emergency situation and they're facing an eviction, you know, regardless of where they applied, they should call the homelessness prevention system. So that's part of the local program, because if they need immediate assistance, there could be other funds available aside from the state program, because they will be connected to other programs that are not necessarily the rent relief funds we've been talking about, but other funding that is available. So if somebody's in an emergency situation, strongly encourage them to call the county's homelessness prevention system services, or EAN network, and just make it very clear that they have applied for rent relief, but they are in a situation, you know, right now where, you know, they're in danger of eviction, to see who they can be connected to. Okay, so that was going to be my point, that the local program not only is it going to help ELI tenants with the rent relief funding, but they will also connect them to other services that might be available, because the goal of the prevention system is housing stability. So that's one of the reasons the county and city wanted to administer those funds, is so they could wrap it into their homelessness prevention system. That was, okay, I'll stop talking. Do you think we should, Anna, do you think we should pause for some questions first before Joann kind of leaps into the mechanics of the application? Does anybody have any questions for a relatively small group?
I can look for raised hands or anything if anyone wants to go off mute.
I don't see any.
Okay.
Okay, I'll turn it over to you, Joann. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily, for your awesome insight and answers. And one more thing about that question, thanks, Tao, for your great questions too, is basically if the applicant who is ELI applied on or before May 20th, then they are in the category that we were talking about, where they should be accepted to the state program because the local program only launched May 20th. So they might have received a glitch email stating they were rejected, and then the state was supposed to email them again saying, actually, we're processing your application. Apologies for the error. So just continuing on. So one of the processes available through the state program is for those who are not technologically proficient to start the rent relief application process by text. They would have to text 211-211 with the word rent. And there are 5 other language options available once you text the word rent, but the word rent does have to be in English. And they would just go through the process of answering their location, their household size, whether they're a tenant or landlord, and then they'll be taken to the correct application website where they can begin their application. And so this is an example if we entered an area code somewhere in Santa Clara County or in Mountain View or San Jose, then it would take us to this website. This link may have been updated since, so this was taken some time ago, but sccrenthelp.org is the correct place to be, which is here. But if you are working with tenants who are comfortable starting the process with computer, or if you're working with a tenant who is unable to start the process by computer and you're, going in yourself to help with their application, then you would go to housingiskey.com to get to this landing page. You can also type in laviviendaesclave.com or housing.ca.gov to get to the same web page. What's new about this web page is that there are the other 5 languages that are available for applicants to apply now on this homepage. So the 5 other languages offered by the state that's fully translated is Spanish, Korean, Mandarin, Vietnamese, and Tagalog. And those weren't available as buttons on this homepage previously, but now you'll see those other colors are available, and that's where applicants should click in order to start the application and continue on through the jurisdiction map and eligibility questionnaire in that same language. So you'll see what those pages look like as we move along. So they would just click that they're a renter or a landlord. And if they are new to the application process, they would click new application, and that would take them to this jurisdiction map. So up in the top left, they would enter either their city, zip code, or full address. And we encourage tenants or yourselves to enter the full address to make sure that we have the correct application program where we're applying. And then you would click, after clicking the little eyeglass, then you would see the view button pop up down below, and you would click that. And if they are supposed to be in the state program, they'll be going through an eligibility questionnaire of 5 questions. For those who are 30% AMI or below, you will be redirected to the Santa Clara County Homelessness Prevention System program. It will cover the same amounts as we discussed as the state program, and will seek out additional support for the tenant to ensure their housing stability. The direct website for the actual local program application is preventhomelessness.org, but we do highly encourage the sccrenthelp.org URL as discussed before. But if the tenant is 50% or 80% AMI in Santa Clara County, then they will likely receive this eligibility page saying that they are eligible to apply for the state program, and they would just click apply now. They'll reach this neighborly software login portal page, and they can register their account. There's an orange symbol on the top right of the page that provides for the alternative languages if you're not already taken to this page in the preferred language. You can toggle that and select the preferred language, enter the email address for the tenant, their first and last name, and the tenant will need to create a password that is a minimum of 12 characters, including uppercase and lowercase letters, a number, and a special character. When working with tenants, I find it's helpful to ask them to write it down right away, just so that they remember their password and username if they're not technologically proficient or tech savvy. And so when you log into the Neighborly Software homepage, this is what that looks like. There are 3 sections. At the very top, it says the contact information for the state if you need to check on the status. In that middle section, it shows the view, continue existing application section of any applications that have already been started. And in the 3rd section will be for starting new applications if they have not had one started already. So I found that when I've worked with tenants who might not have remembered that they started an application, even when I've registered for their account with them, I end up seeing an application already in the view or continue an existing application section. So that might be the case for anyone that you help out, and it's nothing bad. As long as they haven't submitted it yet, then you can continue on with that same application. If they did happen to submit one already, and you can still review it. If they did submit it, you can still review to see what they entered. If you discovered they should probably amend it, then they would have to go and email or call the contact number at the top of this page in order to reopen the application. And all they would need to do is provide their name and their case ID number. So if the tenant is okay with having, you or someone else as a trusted person to access and receive emails on behalf of them or about their application, they would click the View Users section on the top left. So this window this button is after clicking one of the existing applications. This button is called View Users, and then you would click Add a User, enter whatever email of the person who is to be given access. And once you click the Add button, that person will get an invitation right away to register for an account through Neighborly Software. And then they will immediately see this application now in their inbox, or sorry, in the view or existing application section. Also, one note is that you cannot easily delete the emails that you add on to this account, and this function, we thought that it might change, but you cannot delete someone from being added as a user. So I just did a little side-by-side comparison just so you all can see what the previous organization looked like for all the different sections required of a tenant application and the current organization. So it's pretty much the same sections exist. However, it's reorganized so that the rental assistance requested as well as the prior assistance received, those two address back rent, and so they're kind of grouping those together. And then some of the more tricky sections, like related to their personal paperwork, such as the household members and their income and their proof of identification or rent owed, are all sort of at the back end of the application now. And what we need to tell tenants who do this application on their own is to remember to click save or complete and continue on each page before changing sections, since it could erase everything if they don't do that. So in terms of the eligibility section, nothing has really changed except for question A3. And just to note, in case you all have anyone asking about A2, it does provide the 2021 area median income limits. Even though, income can also be based on 2020 income, just know that the chart that is normally on this website and possibly other organizations' websites will use 2021 numbers. So in question A3, Santa Clara County and the city of San Jose are listed. So question A3 asks, some cities and counties are operating their own local rental assistance program. If you live in one of the cities or counties listed, you must apply to your local program. So that's not, as we know, it's not entirely true for Santa Clara County and the city of San Jose. So the stop sign does appear, but if you read further, it does state that extremely low income residents can go to or should apply to the local program. So it's only the extremely low income residents that should apply at the local program. And if you see here, we have a chart for that to help your tenants, because in the previous page, it does not show what is considered 30% AMI, which is also known as extremely low income. So if it's helpful to you, you can use this page, or if you have your own chart, it might be helpful if you're working with tenants. But we're trying to work on this change and communicate with our network officers to get this addressed immediately. Emily has been on it, so she has done a great job of, poking them about this, but it does take some time to have these things done.
Yeah, and I just want to add, it's just, there's a lot of work behind the scenes, and we've worked with the city and the county, like when we saw this, and we've elevated it all the way to the state level to at least have them give some explanations. They shouldn't even be asking about eligibility at this point, because people who are less than 30% AMI should have been redirected before, but some people were getting through, so that's their reason. One of the things we asked them to change was like, don't put a stop sign, because that just, it's, implies like you're doing something wrong. People should still move on, just try to ignore it. I know it's hard, but please emphasize that we are all on it, and some of these changes don't reflect changes to the program. It's just an error. So, okay, go ahead.
And one more thing to note is if any of the tenants you're helping are indeed ELI, and if they do follow through with the state program, the application will be rejected, as we noted before. Some might have thought that the application would simply be passed over to the county, but it will be rejected and it will not be passed to the county. So if any tenants are ELI and attempting to apply through the state program, just let them know that may happen. And I know they may be eager to receive help right away if you're able to help them and you only work with the state application, but just let them know that it will be more time saving for them to just apply through the local program, and they'll get much more, potentially more services than the state program. So in section B, the applicant information section, there are a couple changes. This is an example of, how there are more pop-ups to help suggest what to include or how to apply, or, what information to provide. And when I hovered over the pop-up for question B5, a variety of property types are eligible to apply. It says to select the unit that best represents your housing type. And if you no longer live at the unit, you can select I no longer live at the unit. So those who are no longer living at the unit may be eligible. And as Emily stated, there are certain parameters to that, such as if it's self-eviction, you are eligible for these rent relief funds. And so we encourage everyone to, even reach out to us if they have questions about their specific circumstances. In question B6, it does ask the question if the applicant is subleasing the unit, and so subletters are now eligible for rent relief as well. That was previously something that the state guidance suggested was not allowed or eligible for rent relief. In question B13, this is now where, down here, this is now where the representatives can be included, so that if they include their phone number and their email, the representative can reach out with that phone number and still get status updates about that person's application. So section C is now the COVID-19 impact page. There is one more section under the incurred significant cost section. So just generally about Section C for COVID-19 impact. This is where the tenants would indicate the ways that they were financially impacted due to COVID-19. And under incurred significant costs, there is now an option to select that they incurred child or adult dependent care expenses due to COVID-19. And then also you do not, the tenants no longer need to submit a signed declaration uploaded to this application. They can simply check this box to attest that they were financially impacted as a result of COVID-19. And in Section D, this is regarding rental assistance requested. Some changes that have been made include that only one form of the landlord's contact information is required, whether that's the address, a phone number, or an email. Previously, all three were required in order to move on, and that was an impediment to those who did not have great relationships with their landlords, or if the landlord did not have an email address and refused to create one. Also, you can include utilities assistance here if the landlord is the utility provider for the tenants. It is actually suggested by the case managers for the state that all the utilities be included here if it is included with the rent, even if it's itemized in a monthly invoice. So if you have any questions about this, it is a little bit more streamlined. Generally, you would just include the monthly rent that the tenant owes. You would ask if the landlord has actually submitted a notice to pay or eviction notice or filed an unlawful detainer. And actually, this is a new section. So in this section, there's no longer an option to enter late fees, as we discussed previously. And at question D4, referrals to local legal aid or self-help legal support groups are now built into the application. So if your tenant has been served with a 15-day notice to pay, an eviction notice, or an unlawful detainer lawsuit, they can click yes at D4 and then actually consent to having their information shared with any local legal aid groups. And then finally in D3 for future rental assistance needed, July 2021 has now opened up. We are informed that applicants who have already submitted their applications will be given a chance to amend them to request additional funds before payment is dispersed. And for those who did already receive payments, they can actually reapply.
And before you move on, Joanne, I just want to make a note about the legal aid or self-help legal group for assistance. If a tenant has received some other kind of termination notice other than 15-day notice to pay or a UD, they shouldn't hesitate to contact a local organization, but checking this will make it easier for that organization to get access to the rent relief application, but they should still do both. Like, don't just rely on checking this because we're not sure, how fast that process is or what happens. Maybe it's really fast, but that if they are served with the UD, they really should. It's a very short time frame to respond, so they need to call the Law Foundation as soon as possible to get help with filing an answer. Because once the answer or responsive pleading is filed, things can slow down, but there's this 5 business day time period that's crucial. Okay.
Thank you. That's a very good point. Okay, so for this next section, section E, prior assistance received, you can indicate whether you received prior assistance for rent or utilities, which now includes friends and family. So that was something that was not possible before. So this is mentioned in the instructions on that top left corner right here, but it is not something that's in the drop-down menu as one of the possible sources. So if the source of the assistance received is not listed or the tenant can't remember, they may leave that source blank and it'll still allow you to continue on in the application. Supporting documentation is not required for this page. Sections F and H are regarding utilities assistance requested, including, water, electric, other utilities, gas, and trash sewage. So utilities invoices are required for all months of assistance requested if any sort of utilities are requested. There's still a place for late fees to be entered in these utility sections, but for the other utilities section, section H on that right side, this is where tenants can request internet services as assistance. But if their internet utilities are wrapped into their mobile phone services, they'll only be partially, they'll partially receive assistance based on, you know, what the case managers would determine is used for internet. And costs such as, you know, pay-per-view or cable that are not related to internet service are not eligible for assistance if that's like wrapped into a cable internet bundle invoice. In section I, this is where a lot of tenants can have questions. The primary, this section instructs at the top that a household member should be anyone who is a full-time occupant of the home. We kind of define it as household members include family members, members signed onto the lease, or other residents of the household who are contributing to the monthly rent payments if they don't have their own separate lease with the homeowner or the landlord. So how you would enter the information on this page is you can enter all those family members or full-time occupants of the home, and then you would have to indicate one of them as a head of household or primary household member. There is a button that says make primary next to each section if they're not entered first, and then you would basically add in if they have income. Minors must be entered as household members as well, but they don't have to enter any employment information. Even if they are employed, their income doesn't count for this application. So as stated, only members over 18 years old must certify their income. And in section J, there are 3 verification options. There's 2020 federal tax returns, participation in a state or federal income qualified assistance program, and other, basically certifying miscellaneous income per household member, which could vary, especially if you have a minor child, then you could choose 3. But it says there are 4 options, but there's actually only 3 listed. So in case that confuses anyone. And if tenants select the second option, just note that they will still need to state their household annual income and attest to that amount. Okay, so in section J, there are several different components to how you can include income if you chose the 3rd option. And sorry, I just want to backtrack that actually you don't need to choose the 3rd option if you have a minor child. You can still choose the 1st or 2nd options if no other income earner adults are in the household. But just to demonstrate like the most complicated scenario, we just choose the 3rd option. And if there's several household members, then you know there are several options that you can choose in terms of the source of income. But I've sort of highlighted here in section 1 that I've highlighted. That's where you would verify the type of income. Section 2, that's where you enter the source of income, and I'll show you the drop-down options on the next slide. In number 3, that's highlighted on this page, that's an income calculator, which I will get to more into in the next slide as well. Number 4 is the types of documents that would be required if there are any, and it'll auto-populate depending on what you choose in number 2. And then number 5 is the file upload button, and number 6 is to add more types of income if you have additional sources. So once you click the calculator button, the 3 windows on the right side of the screen would populate. And as you see on the left side of the screen, those are the different options that are possible for your source of income. So you would use these 3 these three possible tabs for the annual income calculator. If you just started working in January of this year and you have a set hourly rate or a set monthly rate that you are paid and it's consistent. If you just got a job, let's say in April, but you were unemployed from January through March, you should use the partial year tab, which is the first tab that opens up when you click this annual income calculator. And that would more accurately reflect if you were unemployed for several months, but now you have a consistent job that has an hourly rate or a monthly rate. Also, if you have very inconsistent pay because you're freelance or, just a circumstance that's like that, then you should use the partial year calculator so that it can reflect, what was possible for you so far. And then that's what they would use to base on the rest of the year, because it would extrapolate and multiply whatever income you put to the rest of the year, the remaining months, in order to determine your annual income. And for section K, supporting paperwork. So this is what we talked about in terms of more lenient paperwork. So in question K1, it asks if the tenant has provided any income documentation, or if they chose cash, or if they did not provide income documentation and they claimed either cash income or zero income. If the answer is yes, and this screen shows the most complicated answer, since this application kind of pops up as you go along. But if you answered no to K1, you would not need to provide further proof of your legal identity, and you would just move on to K2. But if you answered yes, then it would take you to question K1A, which asks if you requested utility assistance. If you did request utility assistance and your names are on those utility statements, or the tenant's names are on the utility statements, then they would not need to provide further proof of legal identity. But if they answered no, then they would be taken to question K1B, which asks them to upload their form of identification and provide several suggestions, such as a government issued library card that has the address on there, even a marriage certificate or license, an employee ID card, or a copy of your divorce decree, credit report. There are several options that people can choose from that won't be restricted to citizenship. So in question K2, it asks to verify your rent owed, but it asks to know whether or not your landlord is participating in the program. If you don't know, then the tenant will be asked to upload a lease agreement. And if they don't have a lease, that's okay too. And it provides several suggestions of how to verify rent owed otherwise. But if the tenant is certain of their landlord's participation, then proof of rent owed is not required. So they won't have to provide the lease or the rent statements or anything like that. What I found with uploading the lease is if the monthly rent that they're obligated to pay does not reflect on the lease, for example, if they've lived in that unit for 10 plus years and have had several rent increase notices since then, I've asked for the tenant to share their most recent rent increase notice. But again, if their landlord is participating, at least they won't have to deal with that. But in case you are working with tenants in that same situation, just to make sure that they're not rejected for not verifying their rent owed, I've asked for that rent increase notice, just the most recent one. And finally, the submission page is a binding contract between the tenant and the California Department of Housing and Community Development, as well as between the tenant and landlord. So I advise them to read this page completely on their own when I'm working with them. I ask them to submit it when we're done with our appointment and not on the call together, so that they can really take their time to go through all of the different sections and make sure that the information is correct. I point to the section in red at the top left to remind them that once they submit an application, it will be hard to make any changes, but we can still amend it by requesting the administrator or the state case managers to reopen them. And then finally, if the tenant has read everything, they would click all the 3 boxes on at the top, or sorry, it's at the bottom of the page, but on this slide, it's on the top right. And then the 4th box is optional. Once they click the click here to electronically sign button, they would just type their full name and then click sign and submit. Okay, so I just wanted to briefly go through the application cycle and different application statuses that are possible after submitting the application and going through follow-up. So I took these images from Horn LLP, and they're the entity that reviews the submitted applications and goes through the QA/QC process. So tenants can view the status of their application in the view/continue an existing application section. So at the bottom of the screen, I've circled where that status is. It's very non-emphatic. So a lot of people miss that that's an actual, that changes. Sorry, but that is where the status would be located. And I also want to point that next to that, it says expires, and then it says not applicable. So I think that expires section will be where, for landlords, I would think, is where that indication will show their deadline to submit their application in order to determine if a landlord is participating. So these are the different types of application statuses that are possible. So as you can see, there are 20 steps. The first step is just before submission, and number 2 would be once the application is submitted. What we've learned is that when an application is already at step 7 and is submitted to quality control for review, the applicant will not be allowed to reopen their application. That may have changed since I had a tenant that I was working with who was not allowed to reopen her application because it was currently under review, but then later on asked if they could, make specific changes, and then noted what those specific changes were. Then they allowed the application to be reopened. So I think there's gray area for all of this, but just letting you know from my experience that there are some limitations to reopening the application. But as we've learned, at the final step of the application process, once they are paid, so that's actually at step 12 when they're approved for payment, we are told that the case managers will actually reach out to the tenants to give them one last chance to actually change the amounts of assistance requested in case they've waited a long time for the assistance and now they actually need more than they had initially requested. So what we've been told are the top issues with tenant applications are their proof of ID. It doesn't meet the program standards. What we've been told, I would suggest that your tenants submit a non-expired identification card. I've been told recently by one of the state's representatives that, and sorry, it's the LISC representatives, they're contracted with the state, is that an expired one would be fine. It does not have to show their address. However, we would need to, it should be a non-expired one, since that was our initial guidance, and I would suggest that it be a non-expired one. It does not need to be, sorry, the address on the ID card does not have to be the current address where they are a tenant, but I believe it should show an address. In terms of income documentation, so there have been issues with not all adults providing income documentation or certifying that they do not have income. So for the tax forms, they need to submit pages 1 and 2. Pay stubs must meet their criteria of having at least 6 weeks of pay stubs. It can't just be one pay stub for 2 weeks. And then for the AMI threshold, I believe that just refers to the income eligibility based on, the jurisdiction, such as for our scenario with Santa Clara County and the division of 50% and 80% applying through the state. For the valid phone number and email address, so this, I believe, will not have to be an issue anymore, since the phone number and email address requirements for landlords is more relaxed if they have their physical property address, but to proofread that for themselves as well and make sure that their contact information is accurate. So for duplicate applications, I've seen this a lot. Tenants will accidentally click start a new application every time, which is at the bottom of the screen. They may be looking at their phone and that's all that they see. So if you're helping with a tenant, make sure to try and help them sort which of the already started applications or their continued applications should be worked on. And you can actually call the call center for the state to request that the old applications be deleted if we're sure one of them is the best one to work with or continue working with. And then for option B residents, that includes those who have completely their own local programs. Applicants were still able to apply through the state, and that was another top issue for rejection. And then finally, for tenant applicants who applied prior to March 27th, they were asked to re-sign since there was new certification language added. But if they did not see that notification, that might be another reason why their application is not moving forward. And then finally, we've included all of the call center support numbers and email addresses here for all of you to have. There's also a booking center number that tenants can be referred to, or that you can call on their behalf to help schedule appointments for those tenants with any local partner that has availability. And there are language options that are available per organization as well. And then for us, we have a helpline email, ERAP@housing.org, which we welcome emails to and would try our best to answer or return calls as soon as possible. And then we, of course, have our usual website, housing.org/COVID-19, that has a lot of helpful links and resources, including our AMI calculator. And then Emily, I'm not sure if you'd like to go over the homelessness prevention system.
I think I talked a little bit about it up front. If maybe we should just open it up for questions. Although I think you can show them the next 2 slides. Joann has shown that they have the information that we shared earlier from the website, seccrenthelp.org. There's links to flyers in Spanish, English, and Vietnamese. And then you can go to the next slide. So part of this network and the local program is they've connected with community service agencies countywide. And here, this is a great help for knowing what languages are supported and where people can get help. And it's all part of the same network. Everyone will get connected to the same programs. It's just, so there's no wrong door is the philosophy that the county is really pushing. Thank you so much, Joann, for that detailed presentation. She's probably one of the most expert people on this application in the entire state. So you guys are fortunate.
Yeah, if any of you have had frequently asked questions, I'd be happy to try and answer, because we're doing our best to figure out answers to our tenants' questions that, there's a lot of gray area that can pop up in these applications. So if you have any frequently asked questions, we'll share answers that we know. If we don't know the answers, I'm going to take down your questions so that I can actually ask them today. The state has weekly office hours now for people like me who have complicated questions.
They know us by name now.
Yes, they do.
Okay, well, I'm going to jump in, and I want to start off by saying thank you again to Emily and Joann for a very robust presentation on a program that we know, has had many changes and is so timely. For those of you who don't know, this was a front page story on today's Mercury News about the rent relief program. So you guys have done a phenomenal job. I want to, as you said, open up the floor and let folks come off of mute if you'd like to ask a question, share some information about how you are connected to this topic or this program, a way of kind of networking, putting names and faces together of who's touching this topic with our community members. So would anybody like to come off mute and share a little bit? Okay, we have crickets, you guys. I'm going to assume that there was one question Tal put in there, when are the office hours? And Emily's answered, they're for local partners, not for the public. So sorry for any confusion, but Tal, did you have any follow-up questions for that?
No, I don't.
Okay. As we said at the top of today's program, we have recorded today's session, and we know that Emily and Joann were furiously updating their slides with all the new information and requirements. So as soon as those slides are available to us, we will post them to our CADRE website along with the recording of today's session, so you can have that as a reference as you continue going forward. If you would also like to receive the slides directly by email as a registered participant of today's session, just send me a quick message in the chat, and I'll make sure that that gets pushed out to you to your private email, so you don't have to push forward into the CADRE website. With that, I want to just ask if there's any other closing questions or comments, and I can bring us to a close on today's session. Let's see. Okay, great. I'm starting to see a couple of direct messages. That's fine, about the slide deck. And this slide that you're seeing on your screen right now is also a part of our CADRE coordination meeting slide deck from yesterday. So that one will go up on the CADRE website very soon. We were really happy to see this and actually applaud all of you with those language buttons. Is a really nice key in addition. So with that, Joann and Emily, any final remarks?
I just want to say, if any of you are assisting a tenant and you have a specific question about the application and it wasn't covered, feel free to email us at the email address I put in. I'm not sure how quick a turnaround, but if it's a technical question, Joann might be able, if you give your phone number, Joann might be able to reach out and resolve that for you. Just say that you're a partner, and that you're helping, or you're helping somebody with a tenant application and have a question about a section.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Emily. So I grabbed the screen share back from Joann. Let's see, are you all seeing that? Next slide up. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So in terms of closing out today's remarks and what's next, the next webinar that CADRE will be hosting is at the end of this month. We'll be hosting PG&E, giving some information about their wildfire safety program, and it's pretty important in the sense that they're also going to be talking about the public safety power shutoffs. And so if you have any questions about that and how that might impact your clients or constituents, feel free to sign up for that session as well. And then we will be getting back to our regular programming with CADRE and offering preparedness and planning workshops directed at the community-based and faith-based organizations for your own preparedness and resilience. Those will be coming forward in a series of trainings later this fall. So just kind of stay tuned on that, and we'll be pushing out more information. And I think that's pretty much all we had for you today. I put up on screen our business office number and email account, as well as what's called our CADRE duty officer. That's if you have something urgent or there is an event that or a situation that's going on immediately that you're trying to find or connect with CADRE nonprofit and government resources for a disaster or emergency situation, you'd use our duty officer. Otherwise, you're welcome to use our business and admin accounts. So you're seeing a bunch of things in the chat. Thank you so much from our participants with, kudos to Emily and Joann. And with that, I will go ahead and adjourn today's webinar.
Thank you, everyone, for giving us your time. And the more people know or learn about, the more it will help the community as a whole.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.